Mariana had always moved through the world as if it were a stage built just for her, a place where velvet curtains opened at her command and everyone else played supporting roles. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from years of luxury, though underneath it hid a sharp edge of superiority she never cared to soften. When she spoke to people with fewer resources, employees, neighbors, even the woman bagging her groceries, her tone sliced through the air like a cold breeze. It wasn't that she wanted to be cruel. She simply believed she deserved more space, more attention, more everything. To her, wealth wasn't just comfort, it was proof. Proof that she was better, smarter, somehow chosen, and she never questioned it. But there were cracks in that polished confidence she didn't notice anymore, the kind that show up only when someone looks closely enough. Friends who once adored her began drifting away, quietly backing out of dinners and gatherings where Mariana spent more time judging than listening. Her staff carried out their tasks with a trained politeness that masked exhaustion, their smiles tight, their eyes avoiding hers. Even strangers sensed something distant about her, as if she lived behind invisible walls too high to see over. She moved through her days on autopilot, convinced she had everything anyone could ever want. Yet the air around her felt strangely hollow, like a grand hall left empty after a party. She didn't see the loneliness forming in the spaces she ignored. The truth was, Mariana's belief in superiority had roots that stretched back decades, childhood moments when she learned that being admired was safer than being vulnerable. She built a fortress of wealth around herself, convinced that nothing and no one could reach in unless she allowed it, and for years, that fortress held strong. But life has a way of shifting, gently at first, then with force, revealing what's been hidden beneath the surface. Something in the air around her estate seemed heavier lately, as if carrying a message she wasn't ready to hear, and though she didn't know it yet, a single unexpected moment was already on its way, ready to test every belief she held about herself and the world. On most mornings, Mariana began her day with a practiced ritual that made her feel untouchable. She would glide across the marble floors of her penthouse, the city stretching beneath her like a kingdom she believed she ruled. As she sipped her imported coffee, she often watched people on the streets below rushing to work, wrapped in worn coats and carrying tired expressions. To her, they looked like distant figures in a painting, fading into the background of her perfect life. She didn't see their stories, only their status, and the quiet assurance that she was above them settled comfortably in her chest. Like an old habit she never questioned. Still, there were moments when life tried to whisper truths she refused to hear, like when the building's doorman offered her a warm smile, only to be met with her distracted nod, or when a young delivery clerk nervously thanked her despite her cold dismissal. These brief encounters held emotions she didn't bother to read: gratitude, hope, even fear, but they floated away unnoticed, dissolving into the routine she'd built. Her world remained sealed, polished, protected. She believed kindness was optional when you lived at the top. After all, she told herself, power was the only real language people understood. Yet beneath the designer dresses and flawless routines, a subtle restlessness was beginning to rise, like the faint tremor before a storm. Mariana felt it in the quiet moments between appointments, when the city lights flickered through her windows and cast long shadows across her home. Something about those shadows unsettled her, though she brushed it off with the confidence of someone who had never truly been challenged. She didn't know that life was shifting around her, rearranging pieces she couldn't see. And on the edges of her story, an unseen force was quietly preparing to knock on the walls she thought would protect her forever. Her lavish home, with its towering ceilings and silent hallways, often felt like a museum curated to impress rather than to comfort. Every piece of furniture had been chosen to display her status, not her personality. Even the air smelled expensive, scented with imported diffusers that masked the absence of warmth. Visitors rarely stayed long, sensing the invisible distance she placed between herself and the world. Mariana liked it that way, or at least she convinced herself she did. She believed that walls, both literal and emotional, were the safest way to live. Still, there were nights when the silence pressed too heavily against those walls, as if testing their strength. On those nights, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange tightness in her chest she couldn't explain. Memories she thought she'd buried began to stir, old moments of rejection, The ache of wanting to be seen rather than admired, the fear of not being enough unless she was better than someone else. She never spoke about these thoughts. She barely admitted them to herself. Instead, she wrapped them in the same armor of superiority she wore during the day, hoping it would hold a little longer. What she didn't realize was that her life, so carefully structured and protected, stood on fragile foundations, and something out there, something she couldn't define, had begun moving toward her with quiet determination, a shift in the air, a prickling at the back of her neck, a feeling she wasn't alone, even when the house was empty. Mariana ignored it, assuming it was nothing more than stress, but life was preparing to interrupt her perfectly rehearsed world, and soon, a single unexpected moment would bring everything she believed into question, beginning with a sound she never expected to hear. The night it happened, the city outside Mariana's windows looked unusually still, wrapped in a quiet so heavy it felt almost staged. She had just settled into her velvet armchair, pretending to read while her mind wandered in restless circles, the kind of circles that appear when silence grows too large to ignore. She tried to shake off the unease, telling herself it was nothing more than fatigue. Yet, deep down, something tightened inside her, as if the world was holding its breath. And then came the sound. Sharp, sudden, and out of place. A knock at midnight. A knock that didn't belong in her pristine, controlled world. For a moment, she stayed frozen, her heart skipping in a way it hadn't since childhood fears she thought she'd outgrown. People didn't just show up at her door, especially not at that hour. Her friends knew better. Her staff lived off-site, and uninvited strangers didn't dare climb the steps to her high-rise suite. The knock came again, slower this time, almost deliberate, and something in its rhythm sent a chill crawling up her spine, nudging awake emotions she didn't want to feel. As she approached the door, every detail around her seemed sharper: the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the floor beneath her feet, the distant buzz of city lights. Her breathing grew shallow, a strange cocktail of curiosity and dread swirling inside her. She hesitated with her hand hovering over the lock, wondering who, or what, waited on the other side. A part of her wanted to call security, but another part felt strangely pulled toward the unknown. It was as if the universe had finally decided it was time for her to listen to something she'd long ignored, beginning with whoever stood quietly in the hallway, waiting for her to open the door. When Mariana finally pulled the door open, she found someone standing there whose presence felt strangely familiar and entirely unsettling. The figure was wrapped in a dark coat, face half hidden by shadows, as if the hallway light refused to touch them. They didn't step forward, didn't attempt to cross her threshold, simply stood still with an air of quiet authority. For the first time in years, Mariana felt small, like a child caught doing something she couldn't explain. The stranger tilted their head, observing her with an intensity that made her chest tighten, and before she could demand anything, they spoke first. Their voice was calm, almost gentle, but carried a weight that seemed to settle directly into her bones. They said they had come with a warning, one she needed to hear whether she wanted to or not. Mariana's instinct was to scoff, to close the door and pretend this interruption didn't exist, but something in the stranger's tone cut through her defenses, slicing through the arrogance she leaned on for comfort. They spoke of illusions, how her entire life was built on fragile ones, shimmering like gold but hollow underneath. And as the words reached her, something inside her flinched, as if recognizing a truth she didn't want to admit. Before she could question them, the visitor reached into their coat and pulled out a small object, placing it gently on the floor between them. They didn't explain what it was or why it mattered. Instead, they simply said that everything in her world could change in a single moment, and she needed to be ready. A flicker of fear crossed her expression, quick, involuntary, impossible to hide. The stranger seemed to notice but didn't comment. They took a slow step back, their eyes lingering on her with a look she couldn't decipher. And then, just as quietly as they'd arrived, they turned and walked down the hallway, leaving behind an object that seemed to hum with a silent message meant only for her. For a long moment, Mariana stayed frozen in the doorway, staring at the mysterious object, as if it might reveal its purpose on its own. Her breath felt trapped in her chest, rising and falling in uneven waves she couldn't quite control. The hallway seemed colder now, the air carrying a faint metallic smell that made her shiver. She crouched down slowly, her fingers trembling as she reached toward the object. It felt heavier than it looked, as though it carried more than its physical weight, and something about it stirred an emotion she hadn't felt in years, unease laced with the slightest tremor of curiosity. She carried it inside, closing the door with a soft click that echoed louder than she expected. The apartment, usually her sanctuary of silence and superiority, suddenly felt different. Shadows stretched strangely across the walls, and the hum of the city outside seemed distant, muffled. She set the object on the table and simply stared at it, unsure if she should open it, read it, or avoid it altogether. Her mind raced, replaying the stranger's words about illusions and sudden change. For the first time, the certainty she wrapped around herself so tightly began to unravel, and she hated how vulnerable that made her feel. As she stood there, gripping the edge of the table for balance, she sensed that the visitor's arrival wasn't just a warning. It was the first push in a direction she'd long avoided, a direction toward truths she'd buried, people she'd dismissed, and consequences she never believed would touch her. The object in front of her seemed almost alive with possibility, holding answers she wasn't ready for but couldn't escape. And though she didn't know it yet, opening it would be the first step into a world she never imagined she'd face, a world already shifting beneath her feet as the night quietly deepened. The trouble didn't begin with thunder or dramatic headlines. It started quietly, slipping into Mariana's life like a cold draft through a cracked window. The first sign arrived the next morning, when her financial advisor called with an unusual hesitation in his voice. He spoke of unexpected fluctuations and temporary instability, phrases she had heard before but never truly worried about. But this time, something in his tone felt different, fragile, almost apologetic. As she hung up, a strange tightness settled in her stomach, a feeling she hadn't experienced since the days before her wealth ever existed. By afternoon, the situation had escalated. Messages from her business partners filled her phone, each more distant than the last, layered with excuses that barely hid the truth. They were pulling away. Mariana paced across her living room, her heels tapping against the marble floor with sharp, anxious rhythm. She felt the walls around her closing in, stripping away the illusion of control she held so tightly. The people she once commanded with a glance were suddenly nowhere to be found. Even her assistant, who always answered her calls within seconds, had gone silent. For the first time, she felt the sting of being ignored. As evening settled, she reached out to people she had dismissed, those she once treated as background characters in her carefully curated life. But each call led to polite refusals, distant apologies, or unanswered rings. The realization hit her with a weight she wasn't prepared to carry. These were the same people she'd pushed aside, spoken down to, or treated like they were disposable. Now, when she needed them, they were choosing not to step back into her world. The consequences of her arrogance weren't abstract anymore. They were tangible, pressing against her chest with every passing minute, and deep within her, fear began to bloom, quiet and relentless. Mariana tried to steady her breathing as she walked through her penthouse, though each room now felt unfamiliar, as if the walls themselves were questioning her. She clutched her phone tightly, scrolling through messages she wished she could unread. Warnings, losses, abrupt withdrawals from people who had once begged for her attention. Her investments were collapsing in real time, numbers dipping so fast they didn't feel real. She pressed a hand against her forehead, trying to push away the rising panic, only to feel her pulse racing beneath her fingertips. Everything she had built was slipping like sand through her grasp, and she couldn't find a single person willing to reach out a hand. The object left by the mysterious visitor remained untouched on her dining table, its presence growing heavier by the minute. Each time she crossed the room, her eyes were drawn to it, as if it held a truth she wasn't ready to face. She remembered the stranger's warning, replaying their voice in her mind, the unsettling, quiet confidence they carried. Her world can change in a single moment. Those words echoed with new meaning now, vibrating against her nerves. Mariana felt herself pulled between denial and dread, unsure which emotion would win. And beneath it all, a subtle tremor of vulnerability took root, something she had long resisted. When her final business partner emailed to officially end their contract, the impact struck her harder than she expected. Her knees weakened, forcing her to sit before she collapsed under the weight of it all. She stared at the email, the words blurring as tears filled her eyes, tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed for years. The silence around her grew thick, amplifying the sound of her unsteady breaths. She tried to call someone, anyone, but each attempt ended the same way, no answer. In that moment, Surrounded by wealth that suddenly felt meaningless, Mariana realized she was experiencing a kind of loneliness she had never known, and the night ahead promised even more unraveling. The night deepened, and Mariana found herself wandering through rooms that once felt like stages for her grandeur, now turning into silent witnesses of her vulnerability. Every familiar object, polished furniture, expensive art, gleaming floors, seemed suddenly foreign, reflecting a life that could vanish in the blink of an eye. She sank into her armchair, the mysterious object from the visitor sitting heavily on the table before her, as if watching her back with quiet patience. A part of her wanted to ignore it, to pretend nothing had changed, yet another part felt an undeniable pull toward it. The room hummed with tension, each shadow seeming to stretch longer, more knowing than she was. Her mind raced, replaying every slight she had ever committed: the cashier she snapped at, the neighbor she dismissed, the assistant she scolded for a minor mistake. Each memory carried a pang of guilt she could no longer deny. For the first time, Mariana truly understood how her arrogance had built walls around her that even wealth couldn't scale. She was utterly alone, stripped of her power and her pride, facing the consequences she had spent a lifetime avoiding. And the object on the table seemed to pulse with quiet insistence, whispering that the next steps, however terrifying, were hers to choose. As dawn crept slowly through her windows, painting the marble floors with a soft golden light, Mariana felt a tremor of something new, an unsettling mix of fear and curiosity. She realized she could no longer rely on her wealth, her status, or her influence. Everything she had believed was unshakable was now fragile, and yet the fragility brought a strange clarity. The visitor's warning, the object, the unraveling of her golden world, all of it pointed to a path she had never walked, a path that might reveal truths about herself she had long avoided. And somewhere in that quiet realization, she felt the first stirrings of a journey she couldn't turn away from. Mariana held the mysterious object in her hands as though it were a fragile key to a door she didn't know existed. The golden light of morning streamed through the windows, bouncing off its surface in ways that seemed almost intentional. Drawing her gaze again and again, she felt a strange pull, a whisper in her mind urging her to look beyond herself, to step outside the walls she had spent decades building. Every instinct screamed caution, yet curiosity laced with desperation, propelled her forward. She wasn't just holding an object, she was holding a promise of revelation, a chance to face what she had long ignored. And deep down, she knew that ignoring it any longer wasn't an option. The first steps of her journey were hesitant, filled with the trembling uncertainty of someone who had never walked a path without control. She returned to people she had wronged, starting with small gestures, apologies mumbled under her breath, hesitant inquiries into their well-being. Faces that had once blurred past her with irritation now turned toward her with surprise, suspicion, or quiet gratitude. Each conversation peeled back layers of pride and arrogance, revealing vulnerabilities she hadn't acknowledged even to herself. She realized that her past actions had left marks deeper than she imagined, and confronting them hurt in ways that wealth could never soothe. Yet with each small connection, a spark of understanding and humility began to flicker within her. As she moved through the city, engaging with lives she had dismissed, Mariana noticed the subtle details she had always overlooked: the worn shoes of a street vendor, the exhaustion in a mother's eyes, the quiet dignity in someone who labored for every small gain. These moments carried stories, struggles, and triumphs she had never considered, and each one chipped away at the illusion of superiority she had clung to for so long. The object, still in her bag, seemed to hum in recognition, as if acknowledging her growing awareness. Something about the day felt transformative, like the first brush of wind before a storm, carrying a hint of redemption and a promise of revelation. And somewhere in that quiet rhythm of life, Mariana sensed that the visitor's purpose was slowly becoming clear. Mariana's journey took her to corners of her city she had never cared to notice, places where life was lived in struggles she had long ignored. She met faces etched with resilience, eyes that told stories of pain, hope, and endurance. Each encounter forced her to confront the selfishness that had defined her, the blind spots she had cultivated to feel safe. With every apology, every gesture of acknowledgement, she felt something inside her shift, a subtle loosening of the rigid armor that had kept her distant. It was painful, humbling, and strangely liberating. For the first time, she realized that true strength was not in dominance, but in empathy and understanding. The object she carried seemed to guide her, nudging her toward places and people she would have once dismissed as insignificant. In its quiet presence, she felt a growing connection to the lives she had once overlooked. One by one, the stories she encountered began to weave a tapestry of her own arrogance and the unintended consequences it had caused. Mariana started recognizing patterns, moments where her actions had hurt, where her words had wounded, where her silence had left others in despair. And yet, she also witnessed the resilience of those she had wronged, the grace they exhibited despite her past cruelty. Their strength, once invisible to her, now illuminated paths she hadn't dared to walk. As the day stretched on, Mariana began to feel a strange sense of alignment, a fragile clarity threading through the chaos of her emotions. She understood that her previous life of ease and control had shielded her from essential truths about humanity, compassion, and the fragility of appearances. The visitor's warning became less a threat and more a call, urging her to reconcile with herself and the world she had overlooked. Each step toward understanding was accompanied by both fear and hope, a delicate tension she hadn't known she could feel so deeply. And as night approached, the sense that her journey was just beginning weighed on her, guiding her toward revelations she was only beginning to glimpse. By nightfall, Mariana found herself standing before someone she had once dismissed with a casual arrogance that now made her cringe. The person's eyes held no bitterness, only a quiet strength and a story of survival that demanded acknowledgement. As they spoke, she listened with a humility she had never known, absorbing details of hardship, resilience, and the ways her past actions had shaped, even slightly, their lives. The realization settled deep inside her. Her wealth, her status, her self-assured superiority had shielded her from truths that were essential to understanding herself and others. For the first time, she felt both regret and a spark of possibility, fragile, yet undeniable. The mysterious object, tucked into her bag, seemed to pulse as though it sensed the shifts within her, vibrating with a silent insistence that something awaited her understanding. Questions that had been buried for years clawed to the surface. Why had the visitor come? What did they intend? And what did they see that she could not? Each answer seemed just beyond reach, teasing her with glimpses of insight. Mariana realized that the journey was far from over. The object, the encounters, the apologies, they were all leading her to a pivotal truth, one that could redefine the life she thought she knew. The weight of it pressed gently but insistently on her shoulders, demanding courage she wasn't sure she had. And as she walked home under the quiet glow of the streetlights, the city around her seemed subtly transformed, as if reflecting the changes within her own heart. She felt an unfamiliar humility, a reverent attention to the ordinary beauty of human life that she had long ignored. The visitor's warning no longer felt threatening. It had become a guide, a compass pointing toward a deeper understanding of herself and the world. Mariana sensed that the next chapter of her life would require choices she had never imagined, steps into a vulnerability she had long resisted. And in the hush of that night, with the object still close at hand, she understood that revelation and transformation were just beginning. Mariana awoke with a sense of quiet determination she had never known, the morning sunlight spilling across her room in a way that felt almost intentional. The mysterious object lay beside her, a silent reminder of the path she had been pushed to follow. She held it carefully, feeling the weight of lessons learned, mistakes faced, and truths discovered. The city outside her window buzzed with life, oblivious to the subtle transformation stirring within her. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about status, control, or superiority. She was thinking about understanding, about connection, about the ripple her choices could leave in the lives of others. And in that moment, she felt the first glimmer of hope. The day called for action, and Mariana moved with a deliberate purpose she had long thought impossible. She reached out to those she had wronged, not with requests for forgiveness, but with gestures of genuine care and attention. Each small act, a sincere apology, a helping hand, a listening ear, felt heavier than any luxury she had ever possessed. She noticed the quiet smiles, the softened eyes, the subtle nods of acceptance from people who had once seemed distant or unreachable. With every step, the weight of her past arrogance lifted slightly, replaced by something unfamiliar yet undeniably rewarding: empathy. It was a sensation she hadn't anticipated, and it startled her with its intensity. Even as Mariana acted, the city seemed to respond, the world around her reflecting the changes within her heart. The air felt lighter, the sounds of daily life richer, the shadows less intimidating, and the visitor's presence, though unseen, loomed gently over her actions, as if silently approving her growth. She understood that the so-called punishment had never been a punishment at all, but an invitation to change, a chance to rebuild herself from the inside out. Mariana could feel the final pieces of her transformation settling into place, yet she knew the journey was not yet over. Something more awaited her, a revelation that promised to solidify the lessons she had fought so hard to embrace. Mariana's steps carried her to a neighborhood she had once overlooked, streets she had passed by without a second thought. Here, life was simpler, struggles more visible, but resilience shone brighter than any luxury she had ever known. She approached a small cafe, remembering the young clerk she had dismissed countless times with impatience and superiority. Today, she offered a smile instead, a genuine one, and listened to the clerk's story with attention she had never granted before. The warmth in the exchange was immediate, a reminder that kindness, unlike wealth, was freely returned. Mariana felt an unfamiliar weight lift from her chest, replaced with the quiet joy of connection. With the mysterious object tucked safely in her bag, she continued, noticing details she had once ignored: the laughter of children playing in the street, the scent of fresh bread from a corner bakery, the way the sun touched the weathered brick of the buildings. Each observation grounded her, reminding her that life's richness was never in possessions, but in moments lived fully, in gestures given and received. She thought of the visitor, the warning, the sudden collapse of her golden world, and understood it had all been a gift in disguise. Every loss, every fear, every sleepless night had led her to this clarity, and a quiet determination settled in her heart, guiding the next step she knew she had to take. By afternoon, Mariana found herself in front of a small, unassuming house, one she had once ignored with the arrogance of wealth. Inside lived someone whose life she had indirectly affected through her past actions, someone whose forgiveness she had never sought. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of humility and courage pressing at her chest. The door creaked as she knocked, and as the resident opened it, she felt the profound vulnerability of standing face to face with the consequences of her own arrogance. Her voice trembled slightly, carrying words she had never thought she would speak, but they felt necessary, right? And healing. And as she waited for a response, the air seemed charged with the quiet promise of redemption. The door opened fully, and Mariana felt a wave of relief mixed with apprehension. The person she faced didn't respond with anger or bitterness, only a quiet, watchful patience that mirrored the lessons she had been learning. Their eyes held stories of struggle, endurance, and forgiveness, and for the first time, Mariana truly saw them, not as background figures in her life, but as human beings with lives intertwined with hers in subtle ways. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of recognition, of seeing herself through someone else's eyes. Every apology, every small gesture, felt like a stone laid carefully on a path she hoped would lead to redemption. As the conversation unfolded, Mariana realized the transformation within her was no longer fragile. It had taken root. She listened more than she spoke, absorbing every detail of another life that had intersected with hers in ways she had never considered. The mysterious object, once a heavy curiosity, now felt like a quiet companion, its purpose fulfilled in guiding her toward these moments of connection and understanding. The visitor's message, cryptic and unsettling when it first arrived, had become clear. The path to growth required humility, courage, and empathy. Mariana could feel the weight of her past arrogance slipping away, replaced with a heart that wanted to give, to repair, to connect. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the quiet street, Mariana stepped back from the house, a soft smile brushing her lips for the first time in years. The object rested in her bag, but the real gift was already inside her, a heart reshaped by experience, a mind open to empathy, and a spirit ready to act with kindness. And as she walked away, a question lingered at the edge of her mind. Had the visitor truly been real, or was this mysterious presence something more, a reflection of her own awakening? The thought didn't frighten her anymore. Instead, it left a shimmering trace of wonder, the kind that promises life can always surprise you, even at the very end. Mariana had always moved through the world as if it were a stage built just for her, a place where velvet curtains opened at her command, and everyone else played supporting roles. She carried herself with a confidence sharpened by decades of luxury, her superiority evident in the way she spoke to employees, neighbors, and store clerks. To her, wealth wasn't just comfort, it was proof of her worth. Beneath the polish, however, cracks were forming, subtle reminders of loneliness she ignored. The world around her, obedient yet distant, hinted that something was quietly shifting, preparing to challenge the life she thought unshakable. On a quiet night, an unexpected knock at her door shattered the illusion of control she had long taken for granted. A mysterious visitor, cloaked in shadow, appeared at midnight with a warning. Her life, built on fragile illusions, could change in a single moment. Before she could question them, the visitor left behind an object whose significance was immediately unsettling, yet impossible to ignore. The air in her penthouse felt different, heavier, as though charged with an unseen force. For the first time in years, Mariana felt a tremor of fear and curiosity, a sensation that would soon become the catalyst for her transformation. Strange events began unfolding almost immediately. Her financial world faltered, investments failed, partners abandoned her, and the people she had mistreated refused to offer help. Her wealth, once a shield, became meaningless, leaving her alone with the vulnerability she had spent a lifetime avoiding. The mysterious object pulsed quietly, a subtle reminder that the visitor's warning was no idle threat. As the days progressed, Mariana confronted a loneliness deeper than she had ever known, and the consequences of her arrogance became tangible, pressing against her chest with relentless weight. Determined to understand, Mariana embarked on a journey toward self-discovery and reconciliation. She sought out those she had wronged, listening to stories of hardship, resilience, and forgiveness, with a humility she had never known. Each encounter chipped away at her pride, revealing the humanity behind the lives she had dismissed. The city, once a backdrop for her superiority, now reflected the richness of human connection she had ignored. The object from the visitor guided her silently, drawing her to places, people, and experiences that demanded empathy, courage, and reflection. By the final stage of her journey, Mariana had begun to transform. She offered sincere apologies and gestures of care, witnessing small acts of warmth and acceptance in return. She experienced the subtle joy of connection, the quiet weight of humility, and the liberation of letting go of arrogance. The visitor's presence, real or mystical, had steered her toward these revelations, teaching that true strength lies in empathy and understanding, not dominance or wealth. Mariana's life, though forever changed, now carried a new purpose: to act with kindness, to rebuild bridges, and to live with a heart attuned to the lives around her. At the story's close, Mariana stood under the fading sunlight, the object resting quietly in her bag, a reminder of the journey she had endured. She smiled softly, aware that her transformation was only beginning, that growth required continued awareness and action. And lingering at the edges of her reflection was the question that would always remain: had the visitor truly been real, or had they been a mystical reflection of her own awakening? The uncertainty no longer frightened her. Instead, it shimmered with possibility, leaving her with the knowledge that life could always surprise her, and that redemption had been waiting for her all along.